This represents the classified NATO briefing they never intended to disclose. This is documentation of the conversation between Berlin and Paris that should have remained confidential. This is the precise instant when Washington's traditional partners understood that American executive authority is experiencing a fundamental breakdown. Reports emerging from Brussels, London, Paris, Berlin, Tokyo, and government centres worldwide verify what intelligence analysts have been signalling for days. International leadership is developing contingency frameworks for potential American governmental failure. Wednesday morning, January 21st, 2026, at 9:23 Central European Time, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg initiated an urgent North Atlantic Council assembly. The subject was not Moscow's territorial ambitions. It was not Beijing's regional expansion. It was not extremist violence in the Middle East. The emergency gathering addressed stability concerns regarding the United States presidency and alliance response options if America's commander-in-chief becomes incapable of meeting treaty obligations. We are discussing America's primary military partners developing backup protocols for scenarios where Washington's leadership cannot be trusted. We are discussing Germany's foreign minister publicly questioning whether Trump possesses cognitive capacity for governance. We are discussing Britain's Prime Minister directing intelligence services to evaluate risks of American political violence spreading internationally. We are discussing Tokyo quietly establishing dialogue channels with Beijing in case American security commitments dissolve. This represents unprecedented diplomatic activity. This is not routine alliance coordination. This is synchronized international preparation for what foreign capitals now openly describe as the Trump constitutional emergency. For 7 decades, American presidents anchored global stability. Even when allies opposed American decisions, they never doubted whether the president could actually function. They never contemplated that the United States might descend into internal disorder that compromises external commitments. That assumption has ended. The worldwide response to Trump's legal, financial, and institutional disintegration is not compassion. It is concern mixed with strategic calculation. Opponents perceive vulnerability and are capitalizing. Partners perceive chaos and are creating alternatives. Non-aligned states perceive superpower decline and are reassessing strategic positions. The international consequences of Trump's domestic breakdown are transforming global power distribution, and this transformation is accelerating beyond predictions. The world observes America's collapse, and governments are planning for futures where the United States no longer provides the reliable leadership it maintained for generations. Let's begin with NATO because this crisis creates the most severe, immediate consequences here. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization operates on one core principle. An assault on one member constitutes assault on all. Article 5 of the NATO Charter obligates all member states to collective response, but that obligation functions only when members maintain mutual confidence, and presently European NATO partners lack confidence that the United States will fulfill commitments under Trump's direction. Wednesday's Emergency NATO Assembly was exceptional in its agenda. According to internal documentation acquired by Der Spiegel and verified by officials in several European governments, deliberations concentrated on 3 catastrophic possibilities. First possibility is Trump directs unilateral NATO exit or threatens to suspend American participation unless European states intervene in his domestic legal situation. This appears irrational, but Trump has already explored this concept in confidential discussions. Individuals inside the White House inform the Financial Times that Trump has proposed to advisers that threatening NATO withdrawal could pressure European financial institutions into providing loans to cover the New York financial judgment. The reasoning is distorted but characteristic. If European administrations want American security protection, they should assist his financial difficulties. European leadership takes this possibility seriously, because Trump historically treats alliances as commercial transactions, rather than permanent commitments. During his initial presidency, he repeatedly threatened NATO departure unless members expanded defence budgets. He characterised NATO as outdated. He questioned why America should protect nations he claimed were not contributing adequately. Now, facing personal financial destruction, European officials fear he might exploit NATO membership for personal advantage. Second possibility is Trump becomes so absorbed by domestic turmoil that he is operationally incapable of addressing NATO emergencies. Consider Russian military forces entering Estonia or Latvia, both NATO participants. The alliance activates Article 5. All members are expected to deploy military response. But Trump is managing a constitutional crisis. His cabinet is evaluating the 25th Amendment. Congress is considering impeachment. His assets are being confiscated. Does he possess the attention, the authority, or the political standing to authorize American military engagement defending a small Baltic nation? European defense leadership genuinely cannot answer, and that ambiguity destroys the alliance's entire deterrent function. If Moscow believes Trump will not or cannot counter aggression, they might challenge the alliance. They might initiate operations in the Baltics or Ukraine or Georgia, calculating that American paralysis creates operational windows. Third possibility is Trump attempts to utilize NATO or American military units stationed in Europe to support his domestic political confrontations. This represents the most disturbing scenario. What if Trump commands American forces in Germany to terminate cooperation with European partners because those partners are not providing political support? What if he attempts to redirect military capabilities or intelligence resources to target his opponents or secure his properties? European defense planners cannot dismiss this. They have observed Trump pressure the Secret Service and contemplate establishing private security forces. They have observed him attempt to weaponize the FBI and Justice Department. The question is whether he might misuse American military presence overseas similarly. The NATO discussion produced several outcomes that indicate fundamental transformation in how the alliance perceives American leadership. First, NATO established crisis coordination mechanisms, allowing European members to synchronize defense actions without requiring American authorization. This represents significant deviation from standard operations, where the United States directs all major alliance initiatives. Second, multiple European nations committed to accelerating independent defense expansion to decrease dependence on American military capacity. France and Germany are reportedly negotiating creation of joint, rapid deployment capability that could address threats without American involvement. Third, and most critically, NATO authorized formation of a study committee to examine legal and operational requirements if the United States formally triggers Article 5, but European members question the request's legitimacy. In other words, what procedures apply if a compromised or unstable American president attempts to involve NATO in conflict, serving personal interests rather than alliance security? These are deliberations that would have been inconceivable 6 months earlier. They represent confidence collapse at the highest levels of history's most effective military partnership. Now let's examine the G7, because economic and financial cooperation is fragmenting alongside military alliances. The Group of Seven, comprising the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy and Japan, is the forum where major advanced economies synchronize policy. The upcoming G7 summit is scheduled for June 2026 in Italy, but serious discussion exists among participating nations about whether Trump should receive invitation. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who assumed office in late 2025, has been direct in confidential exchanges with other G7 leadership. According to individuals who spoke to the Toronto Star, Carney has stated that inviting Trump to the summit would waste time given his domestic difficulties and would validate a president who may lack legitimacy by June if impeachment or the 25th Amendment has been applied. The British government exercises more diplomatic restraint but shares equivalent concern. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has instructed the Foreign Office to develop contingency frameworks for engaging the United States if Trump is removed from office or becomes unable to govern. The United Kingdom is America's closest partner, but even that special relationship faces testing. British intelligence organisations have reportedly expanded monitoring of American domestic political developments because they view Washington instability as a direct threat to British national security. The French and German positions are perhaps most instructive. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz conducted joint video consultation on Tuesday, January 20th. According to leaked briefing materials reported by Le Monde, Macron informed Scholz that Europe must prepare for an extended period of American unreliability, potentially lasting years. Macron argued that even if Trump is removed, institutional damage is so extensive that the subsequent administration will require years rebuilding credibility. Europe cannot remain passive. It must develop strategic independence. The economic implications are substantial. The G7 coordinates on trade frameworks, financial oversight, currency management, and global economic crisis response. If the United States is perceived as an unreliable participant, other members will make determinations without American consultation or despite American opposition. This is already occurring. The European Union is reportedly accelerating negotiation of trade arrangements with China and other Asian economies specifically to reduce reliance on American markets. Japan is pursuing comparable strategies. The message is unambiguous. If America is too unstable to be a dependable partner, other nations will identify new partnerships. The Japanese response warrants particular examination because Japan has been among America's most faithful allies for 7 decades. The US-Japan Security Alliance is the foundation of American Pacific strategy, but Trump's crisis is causing Tokyo to question that alliance. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba convened Emergency National Security Council Assembly on Monday, January 19th. According to coverage in the Nikkei, discussion addressed whether Japan should develop independent nuclear capabilities as protection against potential American abandonment. This is monumental transformation. Japan has maintained constitutional pacifism since World War II. The prospect of Japan acquiring nuclear weapons would destabilize all of Asia. But Japanese defense officials are examining Trump's implosion and questioning whether they can still depend on the American nuclear umbrella protecting them from China and North Korea. If the answer is uncertain, Japan requires alternatives. South Korea is conducting similar deliberations. The South Korean government has not publicized its concerns, but intelligence sources indicate Seoul is quietly exploring whether improved Beijing relations are necessary as insurance against American unreliability. This is precisely what China desires. If America's Asian partners begin hedging toward Beijing, American Pacific influence collapses. Now let's analyze how America's adversaries are responding, because they are not expressing concern. They are celebrating and exploiting opportunity. In Moscow, Russian state broadcasting has provided continuous coverage of Trump's crisis for weeks. The perspective is triumphant. Russian propaganda depicts Trump as victim of corrupt American institutional opposition, but the underlying message is that American democracy is fragile and dysfunctional. Russia has been testing boundaries. There have been increased Russian military aviation operations near NATO airspace. Russian naval platforms have been operating closer to NATO maritime zones. Russian cyber operations targeting European infrastructure have intensified. The pattern suggests Russia is probing to assess NATO response when the American president is distracted and weakened. Intelligence organizations in Estonia and Poland have documented unusual Russian troop repositioning near their frontiers. Nothing constituting immediate invasion, but sufficient to generate concern. The concern is that Russia is positioning assets to capitalize on opportunity window if Trump's crisis intensifies. In Beijing, the Chinese government exercises more strategic calculation and less obvious exploitation than Russia. Chinese state media has covered Trump's legal difficulties, but has avoided overt celebration. Instead, China is using the crisis to advance interests discreetly. Chinese diplomats have been contacting Asian nations, offering economic assistance and security cooperation. The messaging is subtle but transparent. America is unreliable. China is stable and powerful. Choose appropriately. China has also accelerated military operations surrounding Taiwan. There have been increased Chinese Air Force penetrations into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Chinese naval training has become more frequent and more aggressive. The calculation in Beijing is that if Trump is consumed by domestic crisis, he is less capable of responding forcefully to Chinese pressure on Taiwan. American military leadership is observing this with concern. If China concludes it has operational window to act on Taiwan while America is paralyzed, we could witness military crisis in the Pacific that Trump is unprepared to manage. In Tehran, the Iranian government is also testing limits. There have been multiple strikes on US personnel in Iraq and Syria by Iranian-supported militias. The attacks have increased in frequency over the past 2 weeks. The Trump administration has issued statements but has not responded militarily. Iran is interpreting this as weakness. They are pushing to determine how far they can proceed before Trump responds. If Trump does not respond, Iran gains advantage. If Trump overreacts with excessive military force, he could initiate conflict that further destabilizes his presidency. Iran benefits either way. The pattern across all three adversaries is identical. They perceive opportunity. They perceive an American president who is distracted, weakened, politically compromised, and potentially incapable of making rational determinations. They are probing, testing, and positioning to exploit the moment. The economic consequences are equally significant. Global financial markets are pricing American political risk in unprecedented ways. The dollar has declined 8% against the euro in the past 3 weeks. That is massive movement for a major currency. It reflects lost confidence in American political stability. Foreign investors are withdrawing capital from US Treasury securities. The yield on the 10-year Treasury has increased to 5.2%, the highest since 2007. Rising yields mean the US government must pay more to borrow capital. That expands the deficit and restricts fiscal options. International banks are reportedly decreasing their exposure to US holdings. Credit default swaps on US sovereign debt, essentially insurance against American default, have increased in price by 40%. This is not because anyone anticipates America will actually default. It is because the political risk premium has exploded. The world's reserve currency is supported by the full faith and credit of the United States government. But what occurs when the world loses faith in the government? What occurs when foreign investors determine that American political dysfunction makes US assets too hazardous? We are discovering in real time. Major corporations with international operations are hedging against American instability. Several Fortune 500 enterprises have reportedly relocated regional headquarters from the United States to Europe or Asia as precautionary measure. They are not abandoning the American market, but they are reducing dependence on American political stability. The signal to global markets is transparent. The United States is no longer perceived as safe haven. It is perceived as risk source. Let's discuss the international institutional response, because multilateral organizations are also preparing for American dysfunction. The United Nations Security Council has 5 permanent members with the veto authority. The United States is one of them. But what occurs if the American representative at the UN is receiving instructions from a president who is mentally unstable or politically compromised? Other Security Council members are discussing this. There is no mechanism in the UN Charter for removing or suspending a permanent member, but there is discussion about whether other members should simply disregard American vetoes if they believe those vetoes are not legitimate expressions of American national interest, but rather personal actions by a compromised leader. This would be unprecedented breakdown in UN governance. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank, both headquartered in Washington and traditionally dominated by American influence, are also preparing for reduced American leadership. The current IMF managing director has reportedly been in discussions with European and Asian finance ministers about how the institution should respond if American domestic chaos makes it impossible for the US Treasury to fulfill its traditional leadership role. The concern is not just about Trump. The concern is that institutional damage will require years to repair regardless of who succeeds Trump. The world cannot wait years. Global economic coordination must continue, so other nations are preparing to assume the leadership vacuum. The World Health Organization, which Trump attempted to withdraw from during his first term and has threatened to defund again, is also reducing reliance on American funding and leadership. International institutions are de-Americanizing themselves as survival strategy. Here is what you need to monitor over the next week, because the international situation is evolving rapidly, and the next series of consequences could materialize at any moment. First, monitor statements from NATO members. If Germany, France, or the UK make public declarations expressing concern about American reliability, that signals private diplomatic efforts have failed and allies are making their worries public. Second, monitor Russian or Chinese military movements. If Russia deploys forces into Ukraine, or if China increases pressure on Taiwan, it means they have calculated that Trump cannot or will not respond effectively. Those movements would trigger major international crises. Third, monitor currency movements. If the dollar continues weakening, if foreign central banks begin diversifying reserves away from US Treasury securities, that signals the world is losing confidence in American economic stability. Fourth, monitor corporate relocations. If major American enterprises announce they are moving headquarters or significant operations overseas, that is vote of no confidence in American political stability. Fifth, monitor G7 communications. If other G7 members begin coordinating policy without including the United States, or if reports emerge of discussions about excluding Trump from the June summit, that the signals fracture in the club of advanced democracies. Sixth, monitor intelligence sharing disruptions. The United States shares intelligence with allies through Five Eyes and other partnerships. If reports surface that allies are withholding intelligence because they do not trust American security, that indicates breakdown in the most sensitive areas of international cooperation. Seventh, monitor trade negotiations. If other countries begin negotiating trade arrangements that explicitly exclude the United States or that are designed to reduce dependence on American markets, that shows long-term strategic realignment. Eighth, monitor statements from international institutions. If the IMF, World Bank, or UN make statements about American political risk or discuss contingency plans, that brings private concerns into public view. The international reaction to Trump's crisis is not just about Trump, it is about whether the world can still depend on American leadership. For 7 decades, the post-World War II order has been constructed on American power, American credibility, and American institutions. Allies trusted that America would honor its commitments. Adversaries feared American strength. Markets believed in American stability. That belief system is collapsing. The world is watching an American president lose his business empire, lose control of his own government, lose the trust of his protective detail, and lose his grip on reality. And the world is asking a question that would have been unthinkable a year ago. What if America is no longer capable of leading? What if the system is so broken that it cannot be repaired quickly? What if this is not just a Trump problem, but deeper institutional decay that will outlast any one president? Those questions are driving strategic decisions in capitals worldwide. Allies are constructing backup plans. Adversaries are testing boundaries. Markets are pricing in risk. The international order is being rewritten in real time. And the United States is losing its position at the centre. Trump's domestic crisis has become global crisis. His personal legal troubles have become geopolitical opportunities for adversaries and strategic dilemmas for allies. The damage he is inflicting extends far beyond American borders. He is not just destroying his own presidency. He is undermining American credibility and influence for a generation. The world leaders who are reacting to Trump's collapse are not just commenting on current events. They are making decisions about the future. They are deciding whether to continue betting on American power or whether to hedge their bets elsewhere. They are deciding whether the transatlantic alliance still functions or whether Europe needs to pursue independent direction. They are deciding whether the Pacific remains an American sphere of influence or whether it is becoming a Chinese sphere. These decisions have consequences that will last decades. The international fallout from Trump's crisis is just beginning, but the trajectory is transparent. American influence is declining. American credibility is damaged. The world order that America constructed is fracturing, and it is happening faster than anyone predicted. Subscribe to stay ahead of this story. Activate notifications to know the moment the next development breaks. Share this with everyone who needs to understand that this is not just an American story anymore. This is a global story. The crisis that started in a Manhattan courtroom is now reshaping the balance of global power. The world is watching America's implosion, and they are preparing for a world where America is no longer the indispensable nation.